Okay. Hi, everyone. Today is November the 30th, Tuesday. Yeah. November the 30th, 2021, Tuesday. And today I would like to review a book that has been released today. Yes. This book is Ray Dalio's um, Principles for the Changing World Order. I think that's what it's called. Or Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Anyways, it's his newest book that has been released today. And if you're wondering how the heck I managed to read it so fast, well, I have Audible, and I'm not sponsored by Audible, just in case that needs to be said. And I listened to this book. So it was released today, so earlier, a few hours ago. I listened to it on 3x speed. I did have access to some of his chapters. Don't ask me how, but I had access to some of them in unedited versions. However, I waited to listen to the entire thing at warp speed because there are some parts that he has edited, and so my book review, so to speak, is going to be on that edited, published, portion of his book. First of all, it's a brilliant book, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you listen to it, read it, in whatever ways and means works for you, because it provides a deeply valuable and objective guide to navigating, or navigating the next decade or so. And I say it's a very useful guide because he kind of gives certain tools of thinking in addition to not predictions per se, but sort of like I may have mentioned this in one of my book reviews of Jim Rickards' books, where he talks about Bayesian statistics. But one of his methods, he describes, the Bayesian way of, even Ray Dalio describes the Bayesian way of probability and analyzing, sort of thinking to yourself, okay, this is what I think is going to happen. Assign a 50-50 probability, and then based on what I think is going to happen, what would the mile markers be, and then if you see those checkpoints being met, then you know that you're headed in that probability versus a different probability. That's sort of the Bayesian method, and he offers that kind of insight, so it's not prediction per se, but it's a guide to thinking. And if you read this book from that standpoint, and if you keep in mind a very objective view and don't get very too like nationalistic, etc., I think you will gain the most from it. Now, something that I really like and appreciate about Ray Dalio is that I don't know if he's a Buddhist, but he definitely has very Buddhist-ish tendencies, and very, he has this way of being that's that that understands that, this is all like Maya Jal, and what is and what will be, what has been, will be, and will be ever after. Amen, so to speak. And even though we say that in Catholicism, I don't think we Catholics, I as a Catholic, I don't think we get it to the extent that the Buddhists have it nailed down to understand these cyclical patterns and not get too attached to them, so to speak, but to remain on that side of evolution. And one thing, the way the book begins is he dedicates the book to his grandchildren, and he begins and ends it with this really beautiful may the force of evolution be with you, which I feel is very Darwinian yet Buddhist at the same time. Also, throughout the book, he presents a lot of really cool Chinese Confucian kind of witticisms that I think are very appropriate for us to consider. I think I may have mentioned before, so among people that I like listening to, Ray Dalio, Jim Rickards, and a few others. But between these two, what I like listening, why I like listening to both of them is because Ray Dalio has, in a way, a very globalist kind of view and a very, in some ways, pro-China view. And Jim Rickards has a very nationalist and, America is best, that kind of view. And he definitely has a bit of a suspicious bias towards China. Jim Rickards, that is, not Ray Dalio, certainly not Ray Dalio. And I like listening to both because I think that it is very important, especially in times like now, to be informed of the entire picture and to not get too married to ideology. And he does go into that a bit in this book as well. So anyways, already 6 minutes in, but okay. I'll try to be quick. I'll try to be brief. Let's see how that goes. So yeah, he dedicates it to his grandchildren. There are a lot of supplemental materials in this book. One by way of sort of the appendix. So each chapter has the main things, and then it also has an appendix to that chapter if you want more detail. And that, for quantitatively inclined people such as myself, it's really valuable and useful to look at those trends. If you're not much into narrative spin and all that, and you're like a truth seeker, you'll love those appendices. Yeah, appendices. Okay. He has a very pragmatic view, not ideological or overly patriotic view. Some people may even argue that his involvement with China, he's kind of gone native, so to speak. But I don't like to think of things in those terms. He goes into sort of the rises and declines of various powers and empires, nations, and kingdoms, so to speak. And he also provides a disclaimer that he is going to use those sort of terms interchangeably because and to not get too mired in that. And I really appreciate the fact that he has taken the time to sort of lay out those disclaimers. Although for somebody like me, that wouldn't be necessary. I think that in a sense he has been very proper and correct in laying that out. Now, one thing I want to call out that is different, because I did find a lot of parallels between some of Jim Rickards' books and this book. And that's interesting because Jim Rickards is much more of a nationalist. He definitely has a very pro-America, anti-China-ish view, and Ray Dalio definitely has a is a collaborative view towards China. Really like trying to get into the mind of China and thinking with the Chinese mind, and viewing events through Chinese eyes. And despite those divergent sort of views, the fact that they are aligned on many things, I think is very useful. I want to point out one thing on which they are different, where he did bring up in the beginning of this as a that he views the pandemic as a natural disaster, whereas Jim Rickards in his last book, after the new Great Depression, the book he released in Jan 2021, he definitely brought up the lab leak thing, and he definitely has his suspicions about the whole origins. Okay, enough said about that. But that's a divergence. And another thing where Ray Dalio does bring this up though is in the very last section where he talks about the different type of wars. He does talk about like biological wars, but he does not even like start up about this being any sort of a bioweapon kind of thing. He does not go there. He does say that a declining power such as America tends to sort of like start up a war when there's maybe no need to, or like gets kind of too balled up in their shorts about things that where they should just back off, but they can't because they'll be seen as weak, and when they're already kind of declining, and that's not going to go so well. And so then and that might like kind of increase the anti-China sentiment, and increase the need for like tension over Taiwan, etc. But he does bring into that. Nevertheless, the crucial points of this book are as follows. He talks about how he thinks of things as archetypical sequences of things. He presents cause and effect relationships, and he converts those into algorithms. And that part I found very similar to Jim Rickards' work that is outlined in his 4 books that are supposed to be like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: The Death of Money, Currency Wars, Road to Ruin and Aftermath, and then his latest the New Great Depression book. And then, he does give those disclaimers about this is a work in progress, because he always views his thinking as a work in progress, and like assumptions made as of now, and that Bayesian statistics, Bayesian assumptions, or Bayesian statistics model of decision making. And he does go into the the disclaimer about the semantics and terminology that he's going to use. Okay. The way his book is structured is absolutely brilliant. He goes into the main metrics that define, he describes first of all the big cycle. If you want to know more about the big cycle, there is a YouTube video that's narrated in his voice. It's called How the Economic Machine Works. It's about 30 minutes long, and I actually made my children watch it because it's an animation. I made my children watch it over like a family movie night. It was very entertaining for them, and they really enjoyed it, and they learned a lot as well. But that animation, it shows sort of that big cycle. So do check it out. It's on YouTube. I won't go into that. And he talks about the determinants, such as the education. Strong education, which does not just mean like bookish education, but even civility and how you are to each other, how people cooperate with each other, which then increases productivity, another measure, which increases the technology, another measure, which increases trade with countries, and increases the sort of the strength of their currency, increases trade powers and military powers then. And and so he goes into sort of those determinants that reside within the within that big cycle. Now, one very, very useful chapter is the changing value of money. I think that is a brilliant chapter as far as what we are going through right now, because a lot of people look at the stock market going up, look at the S&P going up, look at their portfolios going up, and they think that they're getting wealthier, but it's not necessarily true, because when your currency is getting devalued grossly, this melt up is not an improvement. It's actually a symbol of decline. And Lynette Zhang on ITM Trading, she does talk about this quite a bit, about how she calls it nominal confusion. Uh, I love that term because it nominal means what something is in namesake, in name only. Therefore, the French word nom, nominal, confusion. If I tell you that your house has gone up from 1 million to $2 million, you think you're that wealthy, but actually, if you think about it, your currency, your money, your whatever, your dollars have, halved in value. If I tell you that, you'll be a lot unhappier. But to think about that, so that chapter, the changing value of money is very useful. Now he talks about the big cycle of internal order and disorder, and the big cycle of external order and disorder. And I think those are very useful also in terms of the populism, etc. That's been happening, I think, since more obviously, I think, since 2016, but have been kind of, the system has kind of like been in obvious death and decline since 2008, I would say. He goes over the history of the past 500 years, which I found particularly insightful and useful, and also corresponded with a lot of personal reading that I've done on the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and he goes into so the Dutch rise and decline, the British rise and decline, the decline and transfer to the British to the US, and now this US to China thing, and this current tussle between the US and China. And all those markers are very, very insightful. The he talks about things very objectively in terms of in the 1907 1913 time frame, when the US actually took away quite a bit of power from the Brits, and the Brits did not even recognize or realize that. That all happened through the Federal Reserve, and a lot of that has been explored in more detail in G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I think it's his book. Anyways, it's also about how the U.S. kind of got dragged into the First World War, but it was profitable to the U.S. and actually really seriously messed with the pound. And in that sense, even though the pound has been declining severely, and that change from the British Empire to the U.S. Empire happened already. The UK is still functioning just fine, and so that lag by 100 years, that is he goes through that very beautifully, I think, because these sort of things, they happen so subtly sometimes that we may not see it or think about it. Okay, what else? Because there's so many. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll go into some of the conclusions that he talks about. He thinks about war in different terms. Like, he just doesn't think about U.S.-China war. No, he talks about it in terms of war happening, in terms of a trade war, technology war. Actually, wait, before I go into that, I should mention a very, very important chapter where he talks about financial planning, individual financial planning in war times. And that is a killer chapter to listen to or to read, depending on your preference, because he makes this one very, if I may quote him correctly, he says that in war times, it's the powers that be are not concerned about the wealthy protecting their wealth, so to speak. And that's true, that's existential, and it's so useful. And in that sense, he talks about how holding debt, i.e. bonds, in war times, in the denomination of the declining power is a horrible idea. And I think to me that like really solidified it for me about why, because I heard he's very like anti-bonds and anti-cash, and Jim Rickards is not. Jim Rickards says hold at least 30% in cash slash tips, bonds, etc. But so that other key crucial difference of like, when you're in war times though, hell no. Okay, so but so now let me get to those concluding points that he comes up with. So war in different terms in trade wars, such as like capital controls people, not people, but when he breaks that apart: trade wars, technology wars, capital wars like sanctions and all that, currency wars, where he posits that the Chinese central banking digital currency is actually an insurance against American sanctions for the Chinese. And I thought that was just brilliant because I never considered that idea. And the other thing was the Evergrande thing, more like an Evergrande cleansing, because if you think about it in terms of he's currency wars, actual military war, where he talks about biological and all that, but culture war, and then the war within oneself. But within the culture war, he describes sort of the Chinese culture being more top down, filial respect, structure, etc., versus the American, which is individual, bottoms up, and the bootstrap philosophy. He describes the Chinese culture and the Chinese way of thinking very beautifully. He describes how the Chinese view the state as the extension of the family. Now, we in America may think of that as absurd. Like, what do you mean the state as I don't want a nanny state, right? I mean, I personally too have objected to that way of like, how dare the governments tell my children like that they can like bypass family, parental like things before they're 18 to do what, to like maybe sign up for any surgery or do whatever, or no nanny state business, right? But we in America think that very, very firmly. But in China, the state is viewed as an extension of the family. But here's the crucial thing, and this is where sort of I think my background as an Indian and the fact that, growing up in India, I do think in an Indian way. I don't necessarily think in an American way, and I describe this in detail in a different video of mine that's called Answering My 12-Year-Old about like complicated geopolitical questions. But I've spent exactly half my life in India and this other half of my life here in America. And so in that sense, I have both ways of thinking. And see, the catch between this, thinking of the state as an extension of the family, there's my notes I wrote, that only works if the leader is benevolent and not motivated by capitalist oligarchy type crony capitalism. So, if you have lobbyists, etc., that model goes to shit. Because I'm like, well, I don't care what the government wants to do with my country, with my children, because you politicians have a freaking 4-year term or whatever, 8-year term, and then you're going to screw up and my children have to pay the price, and you're going to be just fine with your lobbying and campaign contributions and whatever else, and you're going to be just fine. So I don't want your nonsense to impact my family. So I think like that. But first of all, China does not have this 4-8-year term business. That's one thing. Second of all, if you think, and this is where that Evergrande thing, it's more of a cleanse where they let Evergrande fail and let any greedy capitalists, be fed to the dogs, basically, or fed to the wolves, whatever the metaphor is, in order to preserve the common prosperity and the common, the middle class. And that is a very, very useful distinction to make. I think when we, as those living in America and considering ourselves Americans, disparage the Chinese way of being, we have to really think about it that way. That, you know what? No, it's, yeah, they think differently because the system also is very different. Their paradigms are also very different, and we don't have that. So we can't it's not apples to apples comparison. So yeah, and then the final war, he says, is the war within ourselves. The war within ourselves. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. One other, I have to go into, I made so many notes about this. What China cares about, he went into that, and I think that's also very crucial into understanding the Chinese mindset. The relationships with neighboring countries and resources, making strategic loans, more like, what is that word? Making loans of that are like, I don't want to use the word quid pro quo, but it's more like like the loan that sort of gives you a share in that person's property, so to speak. Sort of like how China made that loan to the state of Victoria, where they own a port in Victoria if the state of Melbourne or the state of Victoria doesn't pay China back, like that kind of there's a very nice word for it that I'm blanking on. Anyways, if I remember the word, I will write the word in the comments, and I will put the minute marker 26. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another important thing that China cares about, its influence with multilateral organizations like the IMF, the UN, etc., the neighboring and ally considerations, and also these things about how, the neighbors of China actually are very pro-China in the economic sense, and in the military sense, even though they may have been in the past for America, right now they're kind of like, they're not sure if America will actually come to their rescue, so to speak. So yeah, some things he talks about to watch out for the China and Russia alliance, and this is a bit of an echo of what Jim Rickards says in his book, The New Case for Gold, where he talks about a 2014 incident where sort of, I think there was some sanction against Iran, and then Iran sold oil to Russia, and he was thinking, well, why would Russia buy oil from Iran, because Russia has enough oil? But then he figured out that, okay, so Russia could sell the oil to China, and then China could give dollars to Russia, and whatever they could, anyways, it was like a trilateral type of deal between the three of them. This was a geopolitical thing in 2014, and that transaction was just brilliant the way it was executed. Sort of, I'm saying brilliant, but it left the US dollar out of the loop, but I won't go any further on that. Yeah, but that was brilliant in sort of strategic maneuvering. And he also talks about it in terms of thinking about this in terms of a multilateral chess game. Because in chess game, you may think just US-China, but that's not the way to think about it, because you have to think not just US-China, but you have to think US-Saudi, Saudi-China, Saudi-Russia, Russia-China, China-Russia, Russia-Saudi, Saudi-China, Singapore, China, Singapore, US, Singapore, Taiwan, Taiwan, US, and all that, in a wild algorithm. And he describes it a lot more eloquently, I would say, than what I'm doing. But so many great things to learn from this book. One line I wrote: "You're holding debt during wartime is never a good idea," which is what I said about his objection to bonds. which is something I had not thought about. Oh yeah, when he made a comparison between the reserve currency. So, I mentioned these different parameters like education and technology, this and that. One of those is reserve currency status. And in that, he talks about like China's currency, and he talks about where it's weak. And now, I must say, Jim Rickards is just scathing in his view about China's capital markets, and he's like, they don't have a bond market, they don't have a proper capital market, they're not transparent, they suck. Like, I mean, he doesn't say they suck, but just about, in very beautiful language. That's Jim Rickards. But Ray Dalio, on the other hand, he he paints a much more he almost gives a list of where they are weak, in a sense that, if you think about it in those terms, you'll realize that this Evergrande cleanse is actually very pro-China. Chinese CBDC is actually very pro-China. Pro-China as a pro renminbi or Chinese yuan becoming a reserve currency. It's actually very pro that, because it gets around a lot of these dollar-denominated U.S. as a reserve currency things. Yeah, I feel like I need to go back and listen to Jim Rickards's book called Road to Ruin or Aftermath, but whichever book has a chapter on SDR and gold, I feel like I need to go back and re-listen to that, because I think that will like really click it in my head about what this is really about. He also talks about sort of the Chinese culture and being less democratic and more in some ways sort of aristocratic, but for good reason. He talks about how both the US and China have left and right leanings, because sometimes Americans may think that being too left is sort of being very Chinese or socialist or communist or whatever, and being very right is very nationalist. That's actually not true, and he draws out this distinction beautifully in this book, because the more important distinction between the Chinese and the US way of being is that top-down and parental filial way, and the bottoms-up individual way. That's really the key difference. Yeah, and in terms of the war with oneself, he really talks about ensuring that we strengthen education. I want to give a shout out, by the way, at this point, to a channel called The Wealthy Educator. He read out an article yesterday. I listened to it last night, and anyways, do listen to his video on the Wealthy Educator channel, because so many things in that article are just so spot on with this, because he talks about education. So Ray Dalio talks about education in terms of not just increasing your book education, but the civility, the cooperation with each other, how we are with each other, because the Wealthy Educator channel goes into sort of how we need to look at these like softer metrics and mental health and equality in students, and how they are doing really within themselves, and not just this very objective. Now, that being said, once that is taken care of, yes, we do need to take care of the more objective things, but the issue is we will not get to the objective things like increasing or maintaining a technological lead, etc., if we don't get these basic things met. If we have students that are disengaged and disinterested and disenfranchised from from even the desire to learn, we're not going to go anywhere squat, no. So that increasing civility and cooperation, that's crucial. In a sense, even bringing back that not mercantilism, like bringing back those sort of trades, of like, it's good to be a good plumber, than to stigmatize certain quote unquote blue collar professions and then drive all of those things out of business. Now, that being said, Ray Dalio also talks about sort of how we are going to look at technology in the future and how we are going to regard, so say China makes a lot of progress in AI and has like robots as nurses, or like in any sort of not nurses, but even nurses, but any profession where or automated vehicles, etc. But then and then make everybody else like engineers or whatever who have to design said robots. But how is that going to impact everybody else who doesn't have access to that sort of STEM education? Are we going to step back and take this sort of more egalitarian and holistic view to preserving our country and those deep populist divides that are happening right now? What are we going to do? So he brings up those sort of things as well. Beautiful quote in the War with Oneself section. He who lives by a crystal ball eats broken glass. I have to say it again. He who lives by a crystal ball eats broken glass. That also reminds me of something I listened to Sadhguru say yesterday, where he was talking about like not being too much into like prophecies, etc., but like being here and now. Anyways, so on the evolution and where he sees things going, there's so much more. There's like 4 pages more of notes, because you have to remember, this is a 16-hour-long book with a 16-hour-long read out book with a separate section on appendices, etc. And then there's also more information that he has on a website called economicprinciples.org. And it seems like he has a lot of like research opportunities kind of things for certain like studies that he does, that I don't know if he hires researchers for, but sure, as a doctoral student that would be stellar to like get into, to have this kind of a fellowship, or like a postdoc fellowship, or even a pre-doc fellowship. That'd be awesome. Yeah. Ray Dalio, if you're listening, sign me up. Okay, so many more things. He talks about technology and all the associated paradigm shifts. He talks about the CRISPR gene editing, AI, gene editing implications. He does go into the climate change and rare earth materials conversation. He not warns us, but he advises people to look at how the alliances between nations harden, is the word he uses, how alliances harden over the next 5 years. But it's more like how these alliances morph over the next 5 years. And he thinks he uses beautiful metaphors, climate like metaphors, like he says it's not, you look at the typhoons, when the typhoon season, the hurricane season is happening, and so like you can't change the hurricane, so but you prepare for it, right? And then one very other interesting quote, he says, things will get better. This specifically about this human plus AI sort of wave will make progress to get better if humanity doesn't kill itself first. And so it's absolutely brilliant book. And another wonderful quote of his is, or another cool Confucian saying, smart rabbit has 3 burrows in terms of geographical diversification. And then from a individual advice standpoint, he talks about putting deferred gratification ahead of immediate gratification, and triangulating among the smartest people you know. So I would like to think that I have been doing that. That's why I listen to people who are with very opposite views, like Jim Rickards and Ray Dalio, and others who are all very opposite thinking, or not opposite thinking, but they provide very different views. Like even these crypto people, like I know Ray Dalio has always been very like, hell no crypto, but there are some people who are very much into this metaverse business and all, and even though I'm not into it, I will listen and I will understand, or try to understand what the game plan is by listening to people like Raoul Pal and Michael Saylor and this Ethereum and Bitcoin thing and all that, because it's like, wait a second, I want to understand from many confluences or many sources, and then find those confluences. And I will end with his, actually, before that, one more cool thing. He talks about dealing with what you know and what you don't know all the possibilities, think of the worst case scenario, and identify and eliminate the intolerable ones, the intolerable scenarios. And he calls that his end of world portfolio. One thing that he said over there that was just so golden. He said that people might think that this sort of end of world portfolio might be quite dark and depressing, but it's not. It's actually very liberating to think in that fashion, and I completely agree, because if any of you have been watching anything that I say over any extended period of time, you know that I do tend to veer on the dark side and in terms of the pessimistic / realistic side of things, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's very liberating actually to do complete risk management, to think about all that can go wrong, because then you can prepare better, in my view. And he also echoes this. And then of course he closes with this beautiful, may the force of evolution be with you. And so I highly recommend his book. Do watch it, listen to it, read it, whatever you like, however, in whatever means. It's become warm over here because I've been sitting in the sun, and it was very cold when I first got here. But anyways, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Share this with anybody who you feel might want these insights of his book, but may not have. I was like merging words there. But may not have the time to actually read it. And thank you again. I appreciate your time. Take care. Bye.